Good evening, Director Sir. Good evening, Dean Sir. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the first leadership lecture of the semester. Today, we will also have a screening of a documentary called Cowspiracy, The Sustainable Secret, co-produced by Dr. Sailesh Rao after the talk. To tell you more about the speaker, Dr. Sailesh Rao is a distinguished alumnus of IIT Madras and Executive Director of the non-profit Climate Healers. An electrical engineer with a PhD from Stanford University in California, Dr. Rao founded Climate Healers to design and deploy meaningful grassroots solutions towards global sustainability. He was selected as a Karmaveer Puraskaar Noble Laureate by the Indian Confederation of NGOs and is author of Carbon Dharma, The Occupation of Butterflies. He is currently working on a follow-up book. I now request Dr. Sailesh Rao to address the audience.
Good evening, everybody. I'm going to talk to you about global sustainability. And normally when people talk about global sustainability, it has to do with energy, it has to do with whether we can continue doing what we are doing and for how long can we do this. But I'm going to talk to you about sustainability in a different context. And the context is based on the treasures that our ancestors have left us in what is known as yoga. So I am the Executive Director of Climate Healers. And Climate Healers, if you notice under the tagline, it says for human, earth, animal liberation. That's the kind of massive transformation that we are looking at for over the next 10 to 20 years. Okay? So what is sustainability? Sustainability means that you can continue doing something for the rest of your life, for as long as you can imagine. So kindness to all life is sustainable, whereas deliberate cruelty to any life is unsustainable. So this is not an energy equation, this is more an equation in terms of ethics. Think about it, truth is sustainable, whereas lying is unsustainable because you'll get caught at some point in time. Right? Unconditional love is sustainable, and hatred is unsustainable. Similarly, peace is sustainable, where war is unsustainable. Selfless action is sustainable, as greed is unsustainable. Freedom is sustainable, while slavery is unsustainable. Now what you need to understand is that what I show on the right-hand side, deliberate cruelty, is a built-in feature of our civilization. You look at what's happening to animals today, they are undergoing deliberate cruelty. If you look at the right side of the second one, lying is unsustainable. Any marketing is lying. And in fact, it's legally lying. Right? They say open happiness. Instead, they should be saying open diabetes. But they would never say that, right? So that's unsustainable. Hatred is unsustainable. We know hatred is prevalent in our current civilization. War. We have had the war on drugs for years. For decades. We've had war on terror for a couple of decades now. War is a continuous feature of our civilization, and it is unsustainable. Greed is unsustainable. I remember talking to some economist after the 2007 collapse, and he said, you know, people come up with the explanation that it's greed that caused this collapse. And that is completely unhelpful because greed is a fundamental feature of our civilization. Greed is what drives the economy, but it's unsustainable. Slavery is still going on, whether it's human slavery or animal slavery is still going on, and it is unsustainable. So we have in our current system built in these features from the right-hand side, and now we are worrying about why is our civilization unsustainable, and how do we get over it? How do we become sustainable? So it's sort of an ethical issue, you see. And I was introduced to this about 3 years ago at the UN Climate Change Conference in Durban, South Africa, where a number of religious leaders got together and they started talking about climate change and what to do about climate change. And they wrote up this huge declaration, and everybody signed it. There were 40 authors, 40 people who signed it, including Archbishop Desmond Tutu. And we presented it to the Christiana Figueres, the Executive Secretary of the UNFCCC. And the lady who's presenting it to Christiana in this picture is Ila Gandhi, the granddaughter of Mahatma Gandhi. Okay? So the religious leaders got involved, all from all faiths. It wasn't just Hindus, there were Muslims, there were Christians, there were Jews, there were Sikhs, Baha'i faith, even atheists were part of this. And here is a simple statement that we made in that declaration. While climate change is a symptom, the fever that our earth has contracted, the underlying disease is the disconnection from creation that plagues human societies throughout the earth. And we, the undersigned, pledge to heal this disconnection by promoting and exemplifying compassion for all creation in all our actions. But you can see the diagnosis is that there is a disconnection from creation. It's really a disconnection from nature. Creation is another way of calling nature. So we are far removed from nature, and so we don't really get good feedback on what we are doing. We do things and then it goes out into the ether and comes back, a month later, and somebody gets affected by what we did. So as long as we are disconnected from nature, we don't have immediate feedback. And that's the underlying disease. That's the diagnosis that these leaders made. So what does it mean to be disconnected from creation, disconnected from nature? So I'm just going to give you one example, and this example is going to be elaborated upon in the movie as well. So this is from the book Harvesting the Biosphere by Václav Smil, where he estimated that the dry biomass of land mammals is split this way. All the wild mammals, all the lions, tigers, elephants, giraffes, deer, you name it, all the wild mammals put together is 10 million tons dry biomass. The dry biomass of all human beings on earth is 100 million tons. And the dry biomass of all the livestock that we breed for our consumption is 300 million tons. So 74% of that total biomass of land mammals is our livestock. 24% is our biomass of human beings. And wild mammals are only 2%. And yet, what do you hear people say? They're trying to find out how can we double the livestock population by the year 2030. We still haven't figured out that this is unsustainable. So when will we stop? When will we stop? And when will we get connected again with what's happening in nature? Will it be when the wild mammals get down to 1% of the total? Or will it be when the wild mammals get down to 0% of the total? Is that when we wake up? So this is part of the disconnection that's happening from creation. Okay? And and you can see the consequences of what we are doing in the forests of the world. This is actually from 2005. It's actually gotten a lot worse than this. What you see here is a forest cover throughout the world, and you see in the middle, from the western end of Africa all the way into India, it's empty. That's a desert. That's a Sahara desert that goes all the way and becomes the Thar Desert in Rajasthan, and it goes into China and becomes the Gobi Desert in China. And that middle is where the ancient civilizations of the world flourished. That's where the Egyptian civilization was, the Sumerian civilization, the Babylonian civilization, the Persian civilization, the Indus Valley civilization, the Chinese civilization. and they deforested that region because that used to be the Fertile Crescent. Look at India, the forest cover of India, and you can see there's hardly any left. And this is where I've been working. I've been working at the boundary of the Thar Desert in the Aravalli Hills, and we are trying to bring back the forests there. Because that's the last stand. Otherwise the desert is going to go into Delhi. And why is this? To understand why it has been deforested to this extent, we have to look at the global bovine density map. This is the density of cows on the planet. And you will see the cows are now bordering the existing forests. So the Amazon is surrounded by cows, the Congo is surrounded by cows, and look at India. India is filled with cows. India has 320 million heads of cattle compared to 90 million in the US, on 1/3 the land area of the US. So the overall density of cattle in India is 9 times the density of the cattle in the US. Because you see, in India we drink a lot of milk and we don't eat so much beef. So we impregnate the cows over and over because we want to exploit them. And then we let them live for 25 years and they're eating the forests. The forests are dying because we're raising more and more cows. This is why in 2008 I became vegan when I saw what was happening in the forests. I realized I was contributing to this problem. And if you look at what's happening around in Latin America, so here is the Amazon, and it is being eaten away by cattle ranches. So it's sort of, it's as if it's locusts that are getting into the Amazon and killing it. At the current rate of deforestation of the Amazon, we have around 10 years before the entire Amazon is done, is dead. And if you think climate has changed until now, wait till the Amazon disappears. Because the Amazon circulates 40% of the water on Earth. And then when the Amazon dies, that water is not going to get recirculated. And so the climate is going to be completely changed. It's going to go awry. And it's not just everywhere. Even in India, where we revere the cows are abused. Okay? But we are disconnected from this, because when we go and buy milk or ice cream, we don't really see what happened to cause this. How did we get that milk or ice cream? In fact, in Rajasthan, where I work, Rajasthan has become the largest exporter of mutton to the Middle East. So people raise goats when cows can no longer be raised in the forest. Because goats are very versatile. They can eat anything. They even dig up roots and eat them. So they can survive on anything. But when the goats are finished with the land, it becomes a desert. That's how deserts are made. But the people who are eating the mutton in the Middle East have no idea that that's really what happened. That's the disconnection I'm talking about. And it isn't just in consumption. You know, this is a house that Mukesh Ambani built in the middle of Mumbai. So it's 27 stories tall, and it cost him $1 billion to build. But from the top floor of his house, he can see the slums of Dharavi. But if he doesn't care, that's a disconnection that's happening. It's not because he's a bad man. It's just that he has gone through this process of disconnection. A lot of us have gone through this. We have been systematically disconnected from nature and from creation so that we don't really see the feedback. And that's how the current system has built it. So what is yoga? Yoga is union. Yoga is actually connection. Yoga is systematic techniques for reconnecting us back to creation, back to nature. So it's a collection of practical techniques to heal our disconnection that our ancestors have left us, a treasure of these practical techniques. There are 4 main branches of yoga, all leading to effortless self-restraint. Because ultimately it's about self-restraint. If everybody wants to build houses like Mukesh Ambani, believe me, you can't have more than 1 million people on the planet. Because the 200,000 such homes, and you will exhaust the entire wealth of the planet. Okay? So self-restraint is something fundamental that we all have to learn. And that's what yoga teaches, ultimately. In traditional literature, it is said that there are 4 main branches of yoga and they are independent. Okay, that eventually they converge. Okay? But I see these 4 main branches as actually sequential in the current situation, where we are looking at it not from an individual standpoint, but from the standpoint of a species. So Jnana Yoga is reconnecting through self-analysis. It's analysis of the mind, analysis of our species. You understand how is it that we can get connected again with nature as a species. Bhakti Yoga is reconnecting through self-surrender. So that's the heart aspect of yoga. Karma Yoga is reconnecting through self-sacrifice. That's the body aspect of yoga. So if you look at everything that you find in Hindu literature, it tends to be broken up into 3. It is broken up into mind, heart and body. And finally, it's Raja Yoga is reconnecting through self-control, which is actually a combination of all 3. But I'm going to look at this not from a point of view of an individual, but from the point of view of a species. So Jnana Yoga, it's healing through self-analysis. So you have to understand, you have to analyze ourselves as a species and see who are we? How do we get connected? Right? So there are 3 main questions of Vedanta actually, and Vedanta actually claims that there are only 3 questions in the world. If you answer these 3 questions, you are done. And the 3 questions are, who are you? So in this case, who are we as a species? What is our relationship with the world? And why are we here? Now there are many, many ways of answering these 3 questions. Everybody can come up with their own answer. But I'm going to put a constraint on the answer. I'm going to constrain the answer so that we assume that our universe is fundamentally compassionate. Okay? Because if you have an infinitude of solutions, let's pick the one that's good for us. So I'll tell you a story. This is where a lot of things happened in my life. This used to be a coffee plantation in the middle of, in a valley that's between the Nagarhole, Mudumalai and Bandipur National Forests. It was a coffee plantation. And a couple from New Jersey came to this coffee plantation and they bought it. And they tore down the fences and they let it go. They returned it back to nature. So initially they had only 50 acres. And over time they bought neighboring plantations until they had about 300 acres. And the wild animals came from Nagarhole, they came from Bandipur, they came from Mudumalai to their sanctuary and started bringing back the forests. So the way they explained it was the elephants would go and eat jackfruits. You should see an elephant take an entire jackfruit from a tree and put it in her mouth and eat it. And then out come the seeds at the other end of the elephant along with manure. So fertilizer for the jackfruit trees to come back up. So over time there were so many of these trees that come up that this became such a dense forest that when we went there in 2009, you can barely walk anywhere except wherever the elephants walked. Because wherever the elephants walked, there was a path. And then the elephants would also go and break branches of trees and eat the leaves and throw the branches away. And that creates an opening for sunlight to stream down and nourish the underbrush. The underbrush was so thick that only snakes could crawl in there. No one else could walk in there. And at night, there was such a din of insects and frogs and life that almost every hertz of my auditory spectrum was filled with noise. I could barely hear my sister talk. Yeah? And this came from a coffee plantation. All you have to do is leave it alone. Okay? And so when Pamela explained it to me, Pamela and Anil were the owners of this sanctuary, I said, so what did you have to do other than letting the elephants come in and the animals come in? And she said, we had to patrol the land and make sure that no human being sets foot in it. And I felt so bad, see, because I was born in the same forest, just 200 kilometers away in Mangalore. And I remember when I was growing up that there used to be a forest there. So I felt, why is it that every animal belongs in the forest and I don't belong? What happened to me? What happened to our species, right? Why is it that we are the only species that don't belong in ecosystems, whereas all others do? And I realized at that point that it was a wrong story that we are telling ourselves. If we tell ourselves a story that we don't belong, we are going to be fundamentally disconnected from nature. So I realized that we have to tell a different story. We have to tell a story where we do belong exactly as we are. But we are doing something that we don't yet understand. And once we understand what it is that we are doing, we will know how to connect back to nature. Okay, so that's the story we try to formulate. So who are we? We have to look at what is the elephant's strength. The elephant is so strong that the elephant can break trees, break branches of trees, and recreate forests automatically, right? So the elephant knows her place in the ecosystem. So what is our place in the ecosystem? How do we fit in the ecosystem? So we have to look at what it is that we are good at as a species, and how can we contribute to ecosystems. So who are we? Actually, we are a very ordinary species. We don't run too fast. We don't hear too well. We don't see too well. We don't smell too well. We can't even climb trees as well as our cousins, the bonobos. So physically, we are a very ordinary species. Okay? But what is it that we found? That there are two main characteristics of our species that stand out. We discovered how to control fire. And through a controlled use of fire, we became exceptional tool builders. Technology. We are very good at technology. We are very good at building tools and instruments. That's our characteristic, okay? That's what we are really good at. So now we have to understand how is it that we can take our strength and deploy it for the good of the ecosystems. Then we would be contributing back to nature exactly as the elephants do. The second thing we are good at is that we are capable of feeling compassion for all life, without exception. We can see the suffering in any other creature. We can empathize with that. So these are the two things that stand out in our species. So the second question is, what is our relationship with the world? How do we fit? So how can we contribute to ecosystems just like the elephants do at Sai Sanctuary, right? And actually all our scriptures have said this. We are a caretaker species. The Bible has said it. Quran has said it. So we are good as caretakers, as sentinels of this prairie. We are the sentinels of the prairie dog colony, so to speak. So we can actually protect all other life from any dangers, external and internal. That's what we are good at. And we have already built the tools to protect life on Earth from all threats. We have done it. But we did it over the last 100 years, okay, in a frenzy. So now we are capable of nurturing all those ecosystems that we destroyed back to life. So this is about healing the planet. So why are we here? This is actually the most important question of the three questions. Because if you understand why, the who and what happens automatically. So why are we here? When the solar system was born 4.6 billion years ago, the Earth was perfectly situated in the center of the habitable zone around the sun. It was the perfect place for life to form. Okay. What is the habitable zone? Habitable zone is where liquid water is found on the surface of the planet. So now we know that there are billions of planets like this in our Milky Way galaxy alone, okay, where the habitable zone is perfect for life to be formed. But when the solar system was formed, the Earth was plumb bang in the middle of the habitable zone. And then over time, what does the sun do? The sun gets hotter and hotter and hotter and hotter. If the sun had the same trajectory as all other stars of the same type, the sun is now 40% hotter than it was when the Earth was first formed. Okay? If it's 40% hotter, now we are no longer in the center of the habitable zone. In fact, the current estimate is using Casting's model, is that the habitable zone around the sun today is from 0.95 AU to 1.67 AU. So we are only 5% away from the inner edge of the habitable zone. That's according to Casting's model. But if you look at it according to Koporopu's model, it's even worse. The habitable zone is from 0.99 AU to 1.7 AU. So what does this mean? It means that the conditions for life are fragile right now on Earth. This is why if you look at the CO2 levels in the atmosphere from 500 million years ago, it was estimated to be anywhere from 6,000 to 50,000 parts per million. That was the CO2 level when complex life was formed. And over time, as the sun got hotter, the CO2 levels had to come down, because in order to preserve the temperature and create conditions for water to be on the surface, liquid water to be on the surface. So the CO2 levels now are so tiny, like from 180 to 280 parts per million, before we came along and pumped a whole bunch into the atmosphere. So life is very fragile. You know, when 60 million years ago, when the asteroid hit the Earth and the dinosaurs died out, life came back. But if an asteroid hits the Earth today, it's unlikely that life will come back. If the same volcanic eruption that killed off the Permian extinction event 250 million years ago happened today, it's unlikely that life will come back. So what did life do? Life created this intelligent species that can shoot down an asteroid before it comes near the Earth. Right? So life created this intelligent species that can suck down the CO2 from the atmosphere if it gets too high. So life created conditions for a species to emerge that can prolong the conditions for life. That is the story that fits the facts, the scientific facts. And when you understand this, if you buy this, okay, and this is a story that you cannot disprove or prove, just like any such story. It's a story. If you like to buy it, if you like to subscribe to that story, it gives you a purpose in life. So, but if you buy this, then if this is really what's been going on, I am in total awe of what this system is. As a systems engineer, I'm in total awe of this system, which created the conditions for this to emerge from a single cell life form through evolution. So that is where you get to surrender. You bow down. But self-surrender doesn't mean you go along with what's going on. Okay? So that's typically a construction that people come up with. They say, just go along with whatever is happening to you. No, that's not what it is. Sometimes the right action is contrary to the prevailing ethos. And I will tell you a story from the first chapter of the Rig Veda that illustrates this. So the Rig Veda also has a story of a tree, just like the Bible has a story of a tree. In the Bible it's the apple tree, and in the Rig Veda it's a fig tree. So the story begins with children playing with sticks and stones on the floor of their hut in the middle of the forest. And their uncle comes to visit them. And the uncle says, so why are you playing with these trifles when the fig tree is right outside your hut? Go out under the cosmic fig tree and wish for anything you want, and it will give it to you. Then you can be playing with real toys instead of these trifles. The children don't believe him. How can there be a tree where you go and wish and it gives you whatever you wish for? That's not the way the universe is built. So they wait until he leaves. Then they rush to the tree and they start wishing. Guess what? They wish for sweets and they get them. And they gorge on the sweets and they get stomachache. They wish for fancy toys and they get them. And they play with the toys and they get bored. Then they wish for fancier toys and they get bigger boredom. There was something about the tree that they didn't understand, which is the tree grants you what you wish for and it grants you the exact opposite. You have to take both at the same time. Because that's how the universe is built, the material universe. But the children didn't know that. All they knew is that they couldn't stop wishing under the tree, and the more they wished, the more miserable they were. Then they become young men and women. And now they're wishing for what young men and women wish for. The four main fruits of the fig tree were sex, fame, money, and power. With sex comes jealousies. With money comes worries. With fame comes isolation. And with power comes palace intrigues and more misery for the young men and women. Then they get to be old men and women. And they congregate under the tree in three different groups. The first group says, this tree ruined our lives. We were so happy when we didn't know about this tree. And the Rig Veda says they were fools, for they hadn't understood the tree. The second group says, we must have been wishing for all the wrong things. If we could go back and wish for different things, I'm sure we would have been a lot happier. And the Rig Veda says they were bigger fools, for they understood less than nothing about the tree. And the third group was the most foolish of the lot, for they come under the tree and they say, we are so miserable, we wish we were dead. And the tree grants them the wish, and they're immediately reborn underneath the same tree, because the tree always grants wishes in dualities, in opposites. So meanwhile, a lame child had been watching all this from inside the window of the hut. He also wanted to go out and wish for a good leg so he could walk. But there was such a crowd of people thronging under the tree, and they wouldn't let him get through. They pushed him away, and he wasn't strong enough to push his way through. So he stood there at the window of the hut and he watched. And he saw how the tree was making everybody miserable. And he began to see the drama that was being played under the tree. And he began to feel this well of compassion come from within him. Not just for the wishers, but also for all the creatures that were affected by the wishing, and all the people who were trying to get in under the tree and wish. And with that well of compassion, he lost the desire to wish, and he was the happiest of the lot. So that's where the story ends. And you know how it is in Hindu literature, in the Hindu scriptures, is that the Vedas say something, and then the Upanishads explain what they try to tell you in the Vedas. So in one of the Upanishads, they tell you that the wishing child and the watching child are inside each one of us. It's up to us to enable one over the other. Okay? So it made it sound like, if you just sit there and watch and you become an observer of life, then you'll be very happy. You don't have to wish. And that was the Bhagavad Gita. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna came to Krishna and he said exactly that. He said, I don't want to wish under the tree. I want to just watch. Why don't I just meditate and be happy? And Krishna said, no, you have to wish. You have to act. Life is about action. And then he explained to Arjuna how to wish under the tree. He said, you see, the people who were wishing under the tree were miserable because they were wishing for themselves. They were wishing, I wish I could have this, wish I could have that. Instead, if you go out under the tree and you wish for the benefit of everybody else and renounce the fruits of your wishing, then you make everybody else happy, and in the process you become happy as well. And in fact, that's the reason we are in the fix that we are in right now. Because we have been pursuing happiness directly. So we have been going under the tree and wishing for our own happiness directly. Whereas if you do it indirectly, then not only are you going to be happy, but you're going to make everybody happy. So that's the story. That's the story of the cosmic fig tree. And I think we are going to wake up to this. So I call this transition that's happening as the metamorphosis. We have been in this caterpillar mode. We have been chewing and eating and consuming like crazy, thinking that we are going to be happy. And now we have to stop and think, because nature is giving us signals saying that we are going too far. And we are going to wake up as butterflies. So a butterfly came out of the caterpillar, but the butterfly is such a different animal, right? So the butterfly sips nectar from flowers instead of consuming everything it sees. And as it sips nectar from flowers, it pollinates the flowers and regenerates life and undoes the damage that she did as a caterpillar. So the third yoga is karma yoga. In fact, almost exactly 100 years ago, this gentleman got on a ship from South Africa, went to England and landed in India. When he got on the ship, he was dressed like he was in the left. He was a lawyer. He was a lawyer, and he was coming to India to see what he can do to help the independence movement in India. And for the next 3 years, he traveled the villages of India and he talked to the people. He understood what was going on. And in 1919, he initiated the Khadi movement. So you see him on the right wearing only Khadi clothes. So his grand idea at that point to drive the British from India was for every Indian to change his clothes. His or her clothes. Change your clothes. He said, you change your clothes and you're going to bring the British down. And people laughed at him at first. And the British laughed at him. The British said, this nut is running around trying to change people's clothes. How can you shake the mightiest empire the world has ever seen by changing clothes? But within a dozen years, the Khadi movement had bankrupted the textile mills of Manchester. And the textile industry in England was the largest industry in England at that time. Then the British took Gandhi seriously. Then the British invited him for the second roundtable conference to London. And the rest is history. That was 1931. So Karma Yoga is about self-sacrifice. It's about doing action, acting. And I believe the same Karma Yoga is going to happen now. The Khadi movement of the 21st century is really the vegan movement, where everybody gives up livestock products and adopts a vegan lifestyle. That is the Khadi movement of the 21st century. Because the largest industry today that is affecting sustainability is the animal agriculture industry. And so this is me in front of Al Gore's climate training with a placard, and my granddaughter is sitting with me. And we are asking Mr. Gore to please take account of what's going on with animal agriculture, because he never talks about it in his presentations. So as a result of this, he did become vegan last year, but he still doesn't talk about it. So we are trying to get him to open his mouth and talk about it. And when it comes to my granddaughter, I'm willing to do anything to make sure that she has a beautiful planet to grow up in. So the last yoga is Raja Yoga, self-control. So this is about systemic change that ensures that sustainability is designed in from the ground up, from the outset. It's a system change, because currently we know our system is based on greed and hatred and war and all this nonsense. It's violence. So we have to now redesign a system, and there are plenty of system designs that are out there that we can choose. And I believe that we are going to adopt a system that is going to allow us to be non-hierarchical and self-sustaining. Because fundamentally, we have had this issue because we have taken these words from the US Declaration of Independence literally. The pursuit of happiness are unalienable rights, and we have assumed that we can pursue happiness directly. See, in Hindu Puranas, there are all these symbolic stories, and the Mahabharata is one such symbolic story. And in the Mahabharata, one of the brothers of the Pandavas is Karna. And Karna fights on behalf of the Kauravas. He is not fighting on behalf of the Pandavas, even though he is a brother of the Pandavas. And the reason is that Karna represents the desire for enlightenment, the desire for happiness. Happiness is like the sun. You shouldn't go for it directly. If you look at it directly, it's going to blind you. So Karna fights on behalf of the Kauravas because the desire for enlightenment is an impediment to enlightenment. So Ralph Waldo Emerson said this beautifully. He said, the purpose of life is not to be happy. It is to be useful, to be honorable, to be compassionate, to have it make some difference that you have lived and lived well. Then happiness comes as a byproduct of doing this. And Pablo Picasso said this, the meaning of life is to find your gift, and the purpose of life is to give it away. And the secret of change is to focus all of our energy on fighting, not on fighting the old, but on building the new. And that's what we've been working on now in the US, in Phoenix. So, Rabindranath Tagore said this, he said, I slept and I dreamt that life was joy. I awoke and saw that life was service. I acted and behold, service was joy. So that's an indirect way of acquiring joy. So yoga is really India's contribution to the world. Arnold Toynbee had said this. He said, it's already becoming clear that a chapter which had a Western beginning will have to have an Indian ending if it is not to end in self-destruction of the human race. At this supremely dangerous moment in human history, the only way of salvation is the ancient Hindu way. This is what our ancestors left us. Here we have the attitude and spirit that can make it possible for the human race to grow together into a single family, which is where we are going in the next 10 to 20 years. And Emerson was a great fan of the Gita because of its advocacy of action, Karma Yoga. He said, I owed a magnificent day to the Bhagavad Gita. It was the first of books. It was as if an empire spoke to us. Nothing small or unworthy, but large, serene, consistent. The voice of an old intelligence, which in another age and climate had pondered and thus disposed of the same questions which exercises today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir, for a wonderful talk. It was very motivational. And I now open the floor for questions.
Hello, sir.
Yeah.
I'm Ashish, third year humanities student, majoring in development studies. Well, in your presentation, you mentioned about deforestation and somewhat linked with the cow density. So, do you see deforestation connected with the number of cows? If I got you right, and please correct me if I didn't. And what about the other factors, the increasing consumerism, the increasing capitalism, the crony capitalism, which has affected in deforestation rather than putting it on cow? Your clarification.
Yeah, so clearly there are a lot of factors for deforestation, but you can look at what is the major cause, what is the number one cause, and it turns out to be livestock. Because habitat loss is responsible for 80% of all deforestation that's happening. And habitat loss, most of it comes from getting land for livestock production. So that's we're going to show that in the movie next, okay?
Even agriculture is also deforestation.
Right. Agriculture, but you see, for instance, the Amazon, the deforestation that's happening in the Amazon is so lush that if you cut down the trees, they'll come back. So in order to grow anything in the Amazon after deforesting it, you have to pour Roundup and kill it. Then you have to grow Roundup ready soy. Okay? And that's only fed to livestock.
But aren't do something like vegan, but where to put the thing? Where to put the line? For example, agriculture again is little against nature. You clear the native species,
right.
Then you grow whatever you want, livestock crop. I mean,
right.
the food crops whatever you want. So even that is not completely ethical or morally right. So
right. So these days you can do agroforestry. I mean agroecology, okay? Agroecological growing of food. That's just as dense as agriculture. You don't have to do monocultures. The only reason we do monocultures is because we want to minimize costs. We want to minimize labor to do that. But you know, if you're in a system where you don't have to go to work, right? There is plenty of labor available for us to do this. So we have to really reimagine systems. It's a systemic issue. Yes, Bhaskar.
I have read quite a bit about this. The thing is, when you come to the Indian subcontinent, right, the thing is slightly different. One big difference is this is the only place where the livestock are fed only agro waste. Okay, the main reason for the proximate reason for deforestation in the Indian subcontinent post-independence has been actually agriculture for growing food for people, not for animals, because we don't grow food for animals.
Right.
Okay, it's a little different now with poultry. We grow food for animals, but with cows we don't grow food for animals. Okay, and even the agriculture, of course, now with deeper understanding is becoming very clear that it is sort of almost a foraging solution because of the poverty. I mean, need not have gone this far in deforestation to feed the people. Okay, that's a different issue, but that's what happened. Of course, you know, then there is the issue of what if you are going to feed the animals only agricultural waste, then there's an issue of what is a stable number, because you're producing so much food, you have so. There will be an issue. You can solve that. You can solve that and figure out. You don't have to necessarily impregnate cows every year. You know, if there's a certain amount of milk you want. Of course, it may also turn out that the amount of milk you can produce is less than what you currently consume, and you may have to reduce the amount, or it may turn out that it is okay. I mean, I don't know. I've not done the equation. One can figure that out. You don't have to necessarily produce, every impregnate a cow continuously.
Right.
But that is the difference, and there's all the other places where livestock is grown for eating the meat, and those equations are very simple. They consume so much food, and you grow food for animals, whether it's China, whether it's Amazon, whether it's Brazil, whether it's the US.
Right.
So that's the big difference. Here, even the huge feed market, cattle feed market, is all based on oilseed waste, and then it's for straw, and they don't. There's almost nothing that's fed directly which is grown for the.
Yeah.
So it's a little complex. I mean, that's what I've learned.
Right.
Maybe I'm wrong.
So what has happened is that since the White Revolution, the White Revolution did something amazing. The White Revolution created this distribution system for milk from the villages to the cities using refrigerated trucks. So suddenly it became evident to the farmers in the villages that they can raise cattle, extract milk and sell the milk and make money. So it became a way for converting the biomass of the forests into cash. Right now what is happening, if you go to Rajasthan, I mean this is where I saw what was going on, and that's where I changed. The people who raise these cattle, I mean they don't drink the milk themselves, they're selling it. Okay? And when I was growing up, my grandparents used to take the excess milk from the cow after the calf was finished. That's how they used to. So they had a cow at home, and when the calf was finished, she would take the excess and feed us. And one day I overheard my grandmother telling my grandfather that this particular calf was drinking too much. So my grandfather told my grandmother to pull him away after 10 minutes. So that's how it starts. Okay? When I go to the village and I watch what's going on, that calf gets 0. The calf is allowed to go and suck on the udder for 30 seconds, and then the woman is pulling away the calf. And the calf is fighting her. So she calls her husband, and they both pull the calf away from the mother, and they tie the calf in front of the mother. And the mother is now licking her baby, and the calf is bleating. Then the woman takes all the milk out. And then she lets the calf go and suck again, so that it sends a message to the mother saying, you don't have enough milk for your baby, so you have to produce more. So the mother now has a feedback system. This is a feedback between the mother and child that we intervene in, and we are trying to maximize production based on that. And I watched that in the village of Rajasthan, and I felt this. I felt sorry for the calf, I felt sorry for the cow, I felt sorry for the woman, because she's probably getting enough money for just her lunch. And I felt sorry for the person who's drinking the milk in the city, because he's going to get arthritis, and he's going to get diabetes and heart disease and all these diseases. Because when I gave up my milk, my arthritis disappeared. You know? So, right. Right.
The reason I'm concerned is, it's okay to give up milk, and it's perfectly fine to do that. There's nothing wrong. But it's dangerous to go on a solution if that's not the right way. Okay, and one has to really think this through in the Indian context. And the issues you're raising are definitely correct, true. But I think, because these kind of things where, even just take even meat eating, right? You may eat meat, and you may raise and kill animals in a much more humane way, or you may do it in a very cruel way. Even within that, you have choices. Okay, so
right.
So I've also seen the traditional ways, where milk is extracted, where things are much more humane, and the calves get their milk and so on. And obviously, when you're doing it as a commercial enterprise, and if you're trying to get the last bit out, this is what will happen. Okay. And it's unsustainable. It will come out in the end. But one has to be, I believe, because one of the damages that we can do if we go on a wrong thing is to actually set us back by 20 years. So I'm a little worried about that, okay, especially in the Indian context. See, milk is not a big deal in most countries. If you go to China, only kids drink milk. Adults don't drink milk.
Right.
So the amount of milk they need as a culture, they don't drink milk.
Right.
So it's perfectly fine. And if we change ourselves also, it's perfectly fine. But given our history and given the whole thing, one has to think very carefully, is it really true that it's essentially a runaway feedback loop, or is it actually something that can be put into a stable condition which is sustainable?
Right, yeah.
That's what I'm worried about. I'm not necessarily trying to defend something because we've done it, but concerned that we might be going on a route which will actually damage the main purpose. Okay,
thanks.
Thank you very much, sir. But to my understanding, at one stage of the life, all activities should be arrested to transcending into super conscious state to communing with the nature. Is not so, sir? Instead of wishing, you said you have to meditate and do yoga and tapas,
right.
Everything.
Right.
To completely transcend all our activities into super conscious state, to meditate with the to communing with the nature.
Right. So you're talking about what Raja Yoga has as 8 steps, right? And you're eventually after dharana and dhyana, you get to samadhi. You're right.
PhD scholar in Humanities and Social Science Department. So I just was wondering, as you said in the second step of Vedanta, they are asking the question about who are we and how we relate. And you said the technology we can use for to sustainability. In that way, if we use genetically modified technology or GM food and crops, I have read in articles talking about there is no much difference when you use GM and organic or, and using the pesticides which actually come out. So how do you put it in the technology if we use in this way to global sustainability?
Oh, so, when you talk about transforming life in a way that, that makes it amenable to chemicals like Roundup, you have to look at the overall picture of what is that doing. Yes, you are allowing one particular crop, a monoculture, to come in your field, but you're killing everything else. And then the Roundup is going to run off and kill other plants nearby. right? So it's hard to contain these things. So rather than trying to shoot for maximum production of a monoculture, I suggest going for a polyculture approach, where you don't need to do this, right? And the polyculture turns out, according to Vandana Shiva, actually produces more food than the monoculture does. And it is sustainable, and the soil keeps regenerating and giving you more and more every year.
Good evening, sir. I'm Hari. I'm an alumnus of IIT. Now at present, I'm a research assistant at Bandipur Tiger Reserve. I work on a plant species, Lantana camara. The story which you talked about, the Sai Sanctuary at Nagarwale Bandipur Tiger Reserve is really good. And I also have some understanding after working there at Bandipur Tiger Reserve that what I feel is a basic problem with us is that we think that we are different from nature, but unfortunately we and nature are together. That man-nature dichotomy is a problem we face, one. The second thing that we face is, so the first I'll ask this, see how, we know that once we get an awareness of this thing that we are not different from the nature, then we might look nature in a different perspective and then work on it. Now, you are working in this field and you know you would have dealt with a lot of people. From your experience, can you tell me how do you exactly convince people and try to make them understand and try to be in communion with nature? What do you do? So this might.
It's to me fundamentally it's about storytelling.
Okay.
So everything is a story, right? Because everything in nature is unique. Every one of us is unique, every leaf is unique, every grain of sand is unique. So we really have to make up stories in order to make sense of reality. And that's what we do when we communicate. And so telling the right stories can inspire people. And I think also setting an example can inspire people. So there is no other way I see I mean, if they should want to be like this, they should want to commune with nature, right? You cannot force anybody to do that.
See, because what I see even in the scientific community, people with limited knowledge, they meddle with the nature, and they, I mean, as if they know everything, and as if they will be able to solve the problem of the nature without, I mean, they think that their intelligence is more than the collective intelligence of the nature. That is one of the biggest problems which I understand, because the project in which I work to has this problem. So, I mean, are there any methods to actually, solve this kind of a problem, or how to approach this?
Right. So the way the Bhagavad Gita prescribes for this kind of approach is to say that do it with the best of intentions. Your intention should be for the benefit of all life, and you have to let go of the fruits of your actions. So not take anything for yourself. Then eventually things will work out. Okay? Whereas if you're doing it for some personal benefit, then you're going to get into trouble.
Because if I see most of the people who work in the scientific community, they're worried about publishing papers. That is what they generally do. So, yeah, as you said, this is going to be a little contradictory. So, I mean, so more than convincing the people who are into the nature, convincing the scientific community is going to be difficult. That's what.
Right. It's a systemic issue. Okay, the whole system is designed in such a way that you all have to go do this for a living. You have to go compete for a living. Yes. Right. Why do we have to create a system where competition is the norm?
Yes. So there needs to be a systemic change there.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Excuse me, sir. Regarding the vegan movement, if we look at the current world population, most of us have a particular diet that gives the balance for your basic sustenance. Now, if everyone were to turn vegan, you still have to maintain the balance in your diet, right? How is it practical anymore? You still have to grow all the crops again, which is again not sustainable. So regarding the sustainability, what's your comments on that?
In the movie we show that for the average vegan diet, you need 1/3 the land of a vegetarian diet, and you need 1/18 the land requirements for a typical American diet. So the land requirement is a lot less. So you release a lot of land back to nature when everyone goes vegan. That's assuming everybody goes vegan. So we're looking at a transition. Okay, it's not going to be instantaneous. And over time, you're going to release land. We see this happening even in Rajasthan. When we just let land go back to nature, the forest comes back. So all you have to do is prevent livestock from going in there and grazing. The forest comes back. So, but the amount of, there is a conversion that happens. Okay, it's an energy issue. When you go from plant foods to animal foods, there's an average reduction in energy by a factor of 38 to 39. So there's 38 calories of plant food has to go into the animal to get 1 calorie of animal food out. So whereas if you take the plant food directly, you don't have to go through that conversion.
As far as deforestation is concerned, there's a current research which says that grazing is not actually which is causing deforestation. It is uncontrolled grazing. Right. By uncontrolled, I mean not planning the grazing. And this particular researcher which I'm referring to is he had a TED talk on it, and what he claims is that grazing actually causes afforestation, not deforestation, if you control it. Right. So rather than reducing the cattle population, don't you think we would be having a much more planned grazing? He actually goes on to prove it, and he has lots of case study in which there are lots of African plains where he actually has that thing.
Well, yeah, you're talking about Alan Savory.
Yes, and the second question I have is, when you claimed veganism is the new movement which we should undergo in, don't you think in any form of thing which you do, moderation is what is required? As in, current problem is not consumption of meat or milk as such. The current problem is excessive consumption of it, and then in the sense that fast food culture, for example, a person would require hardly 250 grams of meat per week or so to have enough protein consumption. On the other hand, a person in America would have half a kg of meat per day or so. So isn't that what is need to be controlled rather than going vegan all the way? And because being vegan is not sustainable in that sense also, because you need to have lots of supplements, and I've seen a lot of my friends who are vegan and they have lots of supplements of their own.
I have none.
I mean, come on. I mean, you need to eat. I've seen them. They sprout all kinds of things, and it's not sustainable. It's
why
even that is extreme. I mean, you don't get your.
Okay, let me address your question from a technical standpoint, from a scientific standpoint. Raising livestock requires land, requires water, requires carbon. Okay, Alan Savory claimed that you can make it carbon positive. That's what he said. Yes, you can make it carbon positive if you provide more land and more water. Then you can make it, it's a trade-off. There is no way to get less land, less water and make it carbon positive. If we did that, everybody and his brother would be doing it today. They don't do that. Right, no. It is grazing, it's overgrazing that caused deforestation, right? Why are we overgrazing? Because there's a demand for livestock products, and the demand is rising. The amount of meat consumption has increased by 72% in the last 20 years. Right. But when someone is smoking a lot, you can't go and say, cut it down by half a pack a day, and then you'll be fine. The Surgeon General never said that. The Surgeon General said, stop smoking. Smoking kills. Eating animals kills the whole planet. That's what I'm telling you. It's not just secondhand smoking. Secondhand eating causes me to get affected from others, right? Well, we have to put down numbers and show that, okay? So, and that's what the movie is doing.
So excuse me.
We are sorry. It was the last question. We'll take questions offline. Thank you. Thank you, sir, for such an insightful lecture. Thank you so much. May I now request Dean IIR, Professor R. Nagarajan sir, to please present Dr. Sailesh Rao with a memento. Thank you, sir.